Hey, good evening. I'm glad to be here with you all tonight. And tonight we are on our third out of four workshops together. Tonight we're talking about attachment styles and boundaries. And I'm glad that we get to do this. So, I am Gretchen, and I am an integrative attachment theory provider, along with having some additional certifications in life model works and neuroscience. And the method that I have created is called the Living Connected Attachment Method. And these are just some things that clients are saying about the results they're getting from working through this. Their needs are being satisfied every day, they're feeling full and satisfied. A client who had worked on the core wound, I'm not safe, says the energy's gone. She looked for it. She was like, I don't find the energy anymore. I am safe. So she's living safe. Imagine that, when that is the issue with so many attachment styles, is that we don't feel safe. And another client I've worked with, their insecurity has gone from a 10 out of 10, always feeling insecure, to a 4 out of 10. And they have the tools now to continue so that they will be secure. And then another client that I've been working with since this spring had been in the school system, had been a teacher, and then they started working with me in the spring. And so we had the whole summer together to work together on feeling confident and capable. And he's just returning from his first day of school, and he's relaxed, and in fact wanted me to know that he was relaxing on his back deck with a cigar. So his internal state of being has completely shifted. So the components for the Living Connected method are, we work on the core beliefs. So if I can take care of the energy in my subconscious that is associated with core beliefs that I have, then when something comes up, when I need to set a boundary, or I'm in a situation or a conflict, then that will be coming up out of my subconscious and governing my relationships. We talk about needs, and we talk about living a full and satisfied life. We talk about saturating and honoring your needs, and finding ways that you can meet your own needs and allowing others to meet your needs, like actually receiving those needs being met. And we look at emotions. So emotions are our cue, our pathway, they're indicators for pretty much everything going on in our subconscious, our hearts. So, as much as we've lived in a culture that has ignored emotions, I do think that's changing. And that is so great, because this is our path into what's going on in my heart. We also can utilize behavior, like, what am I doing? And why am I doing that? Why am I not doing what I want to do, and doing what I don't want to do? And we look at communication in relationships, along with communication with myself, and learning how I can connect with my subconscious and how I can hear my subconscious. And then we, of course, will look at boundaries, and what does it mean to have boundaries? How do I protect myself, and how do I protect the relationships I want? So tonight we are looking at a brief attachment style review, and boundaries and attachment styles. So we're back after people sharing. And so we're just reviewing the attachment styles. And I love our little secure icon. Notice the body language with this person and their face. Their eyes are open and happy. Their body language says, hey, I'd love to talk with you. I'm open. My heart's open. You can tell that our heart is open. And then if we go over here, we have our little icon for the anxious, preoccupied. Notice their eyes are closed. Their hand is on their heart. They're not really aware of themselves much. They're preoccupied and kind of anxious about their relationships in their life. They tend to not feel okay unless their relationship's okay. And they tend to take care of others quite a bit. And then here is our icon for the dismissive-avoidant. Notice the body language, kind of closed, not turned towards someone. They tend to dismiss themselves and others. They avoid conflict. They're protecting their peace. If I can maintain a certain emotional, relational distance, everything will be okay. They're great people. And remember, this is just overviews real quick from the last times that we've been together. This is our icon for the fearful avoidant. This person wants to be in relationship with others, but they're afraid. They're afraid of being betrayed. They're afraid of being hurt or abandoned. And so, as much as they want to connect, they also pull back. And so, you'll get this push pull with them as well. So, let's look tonight at what boundaries are. A boundary is an imaginary line that separates you from others, specifically your feelings, your needs, and your personal reality. I love this quote that Brene Brown has made famous, but she's quoting Prentice Hemphill, who's an author. Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. How much space needs to be in between you and me in order for me to love both of us at the same time? And boundaries also teach people how you want to be treated. If we don't have them in our lives, we're likely to be taken advantage of, not because people are bad, but because they respond unconsciously to the messaging that we give from our core wounds. If I don't value myself, if I don't think I'm worthy, that's the message I'm sending out by the way that I treat myself. It's usually learned or an unlearned experience, maybe from trauma events, and also maybe it's what was demonstrated in our home. Maybe in our home, it was demonstrated that you always make sure everybody's okay. Maybe we had one of those moms that was just a super helper mom. Boundaries are an authentic expression of myself as a person. A boundary is valuable because it's you truly showing up. It's me truly showing up, tuning into myself and expressing honestly who I am to others. Who I am, what I need, what my values are, what my character is. I am the type of person who. What if the quality of your relationships improved because the quality of how you treated yourself improved? What if the quality of my relationships could increase because the quality of my boundaries increased? Boundaries are an essential expression of my feelings and my needs combined in a way that puts a stop to an action. So maybe I want somebody to stop doing something, and it also can invite certain action to take place. Becoming masterful at setting boundaries requires the art of being able to tune into myself. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? What am I making this mean while I'm in the presence of others? Because maybe I need to set a boundary right away. The other thing I want to consider is what's motivating my boundaries. So as we're on this attachment healing journey, I'm going to be moving from fear boundaries to love boundaries. And I can start to ask myself, am I doing this because I'm in fear, or am I doing this because I'm in love? I'm self-honoring. I'm loving myself and the other simultaneously. Am I protecting myself, or am I honoring myself? And it may seem interesting, like the anxious preoccupied gets to have a lot of support around boundaries because their boundaries might look very kind and loving, but are they protecting themselves by way of protecting the connection so that they don't feel abandoned? So the nuances of the motivation is really key. What's the nuance of what's going on here? Because that's not actually love. And so when I tend to be an over helper, so concerned about not losing connection, it doesn't necessarily feel loving to the other person. If you've ever had feedback about, I don't need that kind of help. Mom, it's too much. I need some more space. If you get that type of feedback from your spouse, your kids, it's worth looking at. Am I doing this because I'm protecting my not feeling abandoned? Am I doing this out of self-protection? And what we want to look for is, am I in joy? Am I in a relational state of peace? So from the neurotheologian Jim Wilder, Dr. Jim Wilder, with Life Model Works, he has defined joy as a state of being open to being in relationship. So it is that what is shared between two people who are glad to be with one another. Am I glad to be with you in this moment? And are you glad to be with me? And am I setting a boundary in relationship to that? So that's what we're looking for. That's what growth looks like. So here we're just looking at each different attachment style, how they relate to their own boundaries, how they respect others, and just a few notes about what that can look like. So the anxious attachment style tends to be pretty inconsistent with their boundaries. They're more concerned with connection. They're more concerned with making sure that they're not going to be abandoned. And so they will often have weak boundaries that they're willing to give up on. And they may over accommodate and be the helpers, making sure everybody else is served before they are. They may push and disregard other people's limits when they're anxious because they will want to connect more than they'll want to respect your boundaries. So this will happen in an anxious, preoccupied, dismissive avoidant relationship where the dismissive avoidant person is like, I need some time to think about this. This is a lot. And they tend to communicate their boundaries without words. So they'll just start to walk away. And that activates the anxious attachment style. And so they start to chase. So this boundary was communicated without words, and then they chase it. So they have a real strong fear of rejection that's driving them, a fear of being abandoned. And so they tend to learn to tolerate discomfort. They tend to learn to tolerate not being respected because they are willing to be treated a certain in an unhealthy way so that at least they can keep the connection. The dismissive avoidant will tend to have rigid boundaries, very protective of their own time, their own space, and often will isolate them. I need to have some time to myself. I need to have some downtime. I'll need to go think about that. And oftentimes they won't use words. They'll just take the time and leave the room. In relationship to other people's boundaries, they may neglect them or dismiss them. They don't care to be, they like their autonomy and freedom. So in liking their autonomy and freedom, other people's boundaries might feel constrictive and like they're taking their autonomy away. They may have had a parent who had a lot of boundaries on them and was helicoptery. And so they may have made a vow like, I'll never allow that to happen. They value their independence. They can respect space, but they struggle to have empathy or negotiate boundaries. So if I set a boundary, they may have difficulty having empathy and honoring that. And they may not want to negotiate. Like if they've set a boundary that they want to enforce and you want to negotiate that with them, they may not be open to that, which mutual negotiation and openness, flexibility that the securely attached person will demonstrate, being flexible and open, is not something that is real comfortable for the dismissive avoidant. And then the fearful avoidant, they're pretty inconsistent with their own boundaries for themselves too. They're working on not feeling afraid. They're working on quelling their anxiety. They may have so much going on in their mind that they don't think about it. I've worked with some fearful avoidants who they don't think about eating. They're just managing the anxiety, or they don't think about what time they should go to bed because they're constantly scrolling to try to find information about how to relax. So the anxiety and the fear can end up governing them instead of boundaries. They can also, however, be porous as well. They'll give up their boundaries in order to feel safe. And they can also sometimes be rigid and be like, nope, I said no, I'm not talking to you. They can be unpredictable and give all or nothing boundaries very passionately and quickly. Forget it, I'm never going to talk to you again. And they can be intrusive or withdraw unexpectedly. There's a push-pull pattern, and they struggle with the fear of rejection and the fear of not being safe, while at the same time really wanting to connect. So when we don't have boundaries in our life, these are the things that can show up. I can feel resentful. I can feel really discouraged or exhausted, depleted. It can create conflict. It can be the thing that we fight about if boundaries aren't in place and if boundaries aren't honored. There can be a true unsatisfaction in relationship to my needs being met. If I don't have boundaries that allow for me to meet my needs and allow for my needs to be met, I'm going to feel very unsatisfied. It will really limit the quality of the connection to other people. And instead of having an internal sense of value and an internal sense of confidence, I'm getting that from the outside. Oftentimes, insecure attachment styles won't have personal boundaries because they're getting their value from out here. Whereas if I do have healthy boundaries, I'm more often than not living in a state of joy and peace. I'm willing to be in relationship. I'm open to being connected to you. So that's that joy. I'm glad to be with you. And internally, I have peace. So that quest that the dismissive avoidant has of having peace internally, in that quest, they have an underlying level of anxiety pretty often all the time, even when they withdraw. So, what would it look like to go, okay, maybe I'm open to setting some boundaries, and maybe I'm open to being negotiating and making, setting boundaries that also invite relationship. The quality of my relationships increases. There's a direct correlation, quality of relational boundaries, quality of relationship. Because remember, I'm telling people how I'm willing to be treated. So if I say I'm no longer willing to be treated like that, and then I'm not, because the person does love me and it is a mutual relationship, then the level of my connection with them just went up. This is very mutually satisfying, along with meeting needs, honoring and respecting one another's boundaries is definitely an element of a satisfying relationship. And then I begin to have self-respect, self-honor, and confidence because I now know how to keep myself safe. I now know how to protect what's most important to me. I know who I am and I know what I value. My character and my values is what I'm being led by rather than my fear and anxiety. So if I do have fears of making boundaries, if it's hard for me, if the thought of telling somebody no just is like, oh, then I could be dealing with a core wound. If there's not a lot of energy around it, you just maybe don't have the words for it, it's just learning how to communicate it or just having some help figuring it out, then that might be a need. Whereas if there's a strong resistance to it, then likely it is a core wound. So the message that what is it that creates this fear? Likely it's the messages that we got when boundaries were not set for us in childhood or in teenage years. So peer pressure can really fall into place here and have formed some of our relationships to boundaries because we were so busy trying to fit in because in middle school and in high school, that's what we're trying to do. We just want to belong. And because we weren't able to belong just as we were, we started to fit in. And that's where we compromise our values and our character. Maybe I thought, oh, I must be a burden. I'm kind of undeserving of being treated that way. I'm a bad person if I say no. I'll be seen as selfish. Maybe I was guilted for setting boundaries. Maybe when I said no, the bigger adult in my life did not listen to my no. For people that have been sufferers of childhood sexual abuse or abuse in general, where your body was violated by somebody that should have been taking care of you, if your God-given no was taken away from you, boundaries can be really challenging to help to learn to set healthy boundaries. Having somebody help you and work through that with you is so imperative if that's part of your story. Sometimes I might think if I set a boundary, it's going to mean there's a conflict. Maybe you saw that happen. So what we saw in the relationships that our caregivers had really was informing us without us knowing it. We were learning by what we saw, learning by example. Maybe I learned there wasn't enough to go around, so I didn't ask for anything. Maybe I learned to not have a need, so I didn't get yelled at. So the more energy that there is around a core wound, the more we make all or nothing boundaries or don't make any boundaries at all. The more we'll have self-protective, non-relational behaviors and boundaries. So let's go ahead and take this assessment. So in taking this assessment, All you need to do is write down when you answer yes, just write the number 1. It doesn't matter. You don't have to tally it. Just if you answer yes to the question, just write the number 1, and then we'll add that at the end. And based on how many yeses you have, I'll give you a framework to see how you're doing with boundaries. So we'll go ahead and get started. It's just yes or no. You don't have to just go with your gut when your gut says it's this. I clearly know what I need, want, and value in my life and relationships. My actions consistently align with my personal values and character. I can distinguish between my feelings and others' feelings. I notice when I feel uncomfortable, resentful, or overwhelmed. I can express my needs and limits without fear, guilt, and shame. I use I statement instead of you and blaming or accusing. I am able to say no without over explaining, saying I'm sorry, or apologizing excessively. I am able to say no. When I set a boundary, I consistently uphold it. I rarely think or say, I had to. They made me. I didn't have a choice. I have to. I do not compromise my boundaries because I feel forced, pressured, or obligated. I respond calmly and confidently when someone challenges or pushes back on my limits, both internally and externally. I respond calmly and confidently when someone challenges or pushes back on my limits, both internally and externally. I notice and honor the boundaries of others. I ask before imposing my needs or expectations on someone else. I can tolerate discomfort when others need space to say no. I act in ways that reflect my values even when it's uncomfortable. I feel proud of the choices I make in upholding my boundaries. I can self-soothe and process emotions without violating my own or others' boundaries. I can soothe myself and process emotions without violating my own or others' boundaries. My boundaries are flexible enough to adapt without compromising my values or character. I learn from past experiences when my boundaries were crossed or ignored. I feel empowered, respected, and safe in my relationships overall. So just score up, add up your total number of ones. Give you a moment to do that. So if you scored between 18 and 20, you have very healthy boundaries. If you score between 14 and 17, you have mostly healthy with some areas to grow. If you scored between 10 and 13, you have moderate boundary challenges. And if you scored 10 or less, you have significant boundary work is recommended. So what does that mean? What do we do with that? How do I get past this? And having somebody that you can work with is very helpful. Now that you know, you've noticed, okay, Here's where I'm at on the roadmap. And where you want to go is where you want to go. So you want to go towards healthy connection. You want to be in a strong, confident relationship with yourself, with others, and with the world around you. So healthy boundary setting is an art, and it's the art of considering yourself when making choices. What a thought, right? I get to consider myself when I'm making a choice. You can consider others, and you must take yourself into account. What do I want? So we get to notice our feelings and follow those. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling pressured. Do I feel disrespected? Do I feel like I'm going to look bad? Do I feel stressed or fatigued, frustrated, resentful, numb, depleted? Do I feel anxiety? And I get to recognize that. I get to recognize, what do I need? Is this a core wound? What do I need to supply relief, balance, to be back at that place of joy and peace? And then learning to communicate these boundaries in a kind and assertive way. And I get to learn how to do that immediately in the moment, right? Like, I know what it's like me to do. I know my values. I know my character. I'm not afraid. And this is a growth, right? This is not like by the end of tonight, you're going to be able to do this. But the awareness of what healthy boundaries looks like can be elusive to us. And so this will help bring awareness. How can I express in a kind yet assertive way as immediately as possible, or as naturally as possible? Maybe I do walk away. Whatever that might be, consider yourself making decisions in the first place in a proactive way. That's the goal, is to be able to get in a place within myself where I have peace in saying, no, that won't work for me. So let's just say someone asks you for a ride to go to the airport before you have a deadline, and you're like, oh, I need to study for a test, and my son wants a ride to the airport. And I'm like, and I had just told myself before he asked, oh, I'm going to take this whole night and I'm going to study so that I'm successful and I can get a good night's sleep and pass my exam. And my son calls and he's in a bind. His ride canceled and he needs a ride to the airport. What do I do? What do I do if I consider myself when making this choice? What if you're at the office and people are standing around in the lunchroom and they're starting to gossip about people and you really don't want to be in that space? It feels icky inside. Young people are starting to say, follow the ick. Do you feel ick? Listen to that. And that's just that unsettled feeling like you don't like what's going on. And you can feel it internally. It's your subconscious being like, ugh. And I get to consider others, and I must take myself into account. So what does that look like? I can walk away. I can just leave the room, likely in that situation. I could just change the subject in a nonchalant way. What is it like me to do? Based on the type of person I am and the values that I have, what is it like me to do? And just remember, a no to someone else might be saying yes to you. So I just want to talk about the progression of boundaries, and we're going to use the situation of being in a car with somebody driving where you don't necessarily feel safe. How many of us have been in that situation where we're like, I don't like how this person is driving? Or how many of us have been that driver where people say, hey, will you do something different? So maybe it's a behavior boundary. I don't feel safe. Would you slow down? And you're asking for what you need, and you're using I statements, and you're talking about how you're feeling. In a healthy relationship, the person will simply say, oh yeah, I apologize, and slow down. If it's not a healthy situation, they're like, why don't you feel safe? I drive all the time. It's not like I'm not driving every day. Get over it. Then the next time you go to get in the car with that person, you may say, actually, I'm not going to be in this situation. I would like to either be the one driving, or I'll go ahead and take my car. And that could be enough of a communication of a boundary that that person that you're in relationship with changes course. Maybe they apologize and they say, "Oh, I'm really sorry. I apologize. I want you to feel safe. I can understand why you didn't. I'll be more careful." And you could decide to get in the car with them that time. You could decide to go ahead and drive anyway. You get to decide. And let's say their response to your suggestion, your boundary was, "That's ridiculous. Why should we take two cars? That's so like what a waste." And you get to say to yourself, what am I going to do here? How do I uphold this boundary? Am I going to drive myself? Or is it time to move to a person boundary where I say, you know what? I'm going to choose not to go, because you're setting a boundary and creating some distance between that you and that person. So you're setting a person boundary. Now, if that is not acceptable to the person, if they're like, "That's so ridiculous. I'm so sure you're making such a big deal out of this. What is wrong with you?" Then, depending on how often this happens and how often you get dismissed, and that would be called like gaslighting, they're turning it around and making it about you. Then you get to look at, what's the quality of this relationship? Do I need a break? Do I need to say, you know what, actually, I'm not going and I'm taking a break for a month? What is it that would honor you, that would create that returning to joy and peace for yourself? Relationships get to be mutually reciprocal. So if this was a heart connected relationship, the person would be very willing by the time you got to the situational boundary to make some adjustments. And certainly by the time you got to the person boundary. Now, in a friendship, you may sometimes when you start to do your boundary work and changing your sense of value for yourself, you're changing your value of your sense of self. Sometimes certain people in certain relationships do end up changing significantly. The thing to remember is that boundaries don't need to be agreed with, they get to be honored. That's the thing to understand. Now, you get to work on your part of it. Is this fear based? Am I making a boundary out of a core fear? You definitely, that's yours to take care of. However, the proximity of a relationship isn't based on how many core wounds you have. It's based on how mutually respectful you are. So if you're two insecure people in relationship with one another, the more you can get to know each other's weaknesses and be tender with those weaknesses and honor those weaknesses, the greater the connection, the greater the mutual satisfaction there will be, and the greater help you can be to helping one another get healed and become securely attached while helping each other in relationship. And sometimes the relationship just gets to change. So remember, boundaries don't need to be agreed with, they get to be honored. And we are responsible for our own things. So I promised that tonight we would be looking at boundaries and seeing how do we want to create some boundaries. You've probably had some things come up as we've been talking about how we feel about boundaries. Now you've done your assessment, so you're aware of where you might want to grow. And so, what has come up? So, some of the areas that we can create boundaries in, or kind of do an assessment, like an inventory. Am I feeling pretty at joy and peace when I'm in my career, when I'm working with the people that I work with? How do I feel when I'm in that situation? How do I feel emotionally about my emotions and their reference to how much I take on the emotions of others? Do I need to work on that? How are my finances? And also this is about setting personal boundaries. For example, how am I with my own personal finances? Do I need to set a boundary on how much I spend? Am I creating places where I don't have joy and peace with myself or with others? Another example financially might be if you have adult children and they call and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't pay my cable and my Wi-Fi. It's a mess. We're not getting paid until the 15th." Do I say, "Oh, that's tough"? Or do I say, am I thinking to myself, what could I go without? Should I go ahead and send them the money? Let's see. What is the first thing that I'm willing to do? Do I protect myself? Do I consider what I want and need and what the other person might want and need? Do I consider what's best for them? Or do I think, ooh, how do I make this insecure fear go away, this anxiety that's just come up? If I have some anxiety coming up as soon as somebody expresses a need, I might need a boundary. And then in relationships as well, we kind of went through that a little bit on our last slide, but looking for patterns of how things are always showing up or often showing up. Another example could be that when someone is stressed about money, do I take that on personally? Do I offer, like, let's say I've been at lunch with somebody and they've been talking about their emotional or their financial woes. They're not doing really well with money. Their husband is in sales and he just didn't make as much as he did last time, but they were the ones that invited you to lunch. Do you think to yourself, oh, I better pay for lunch, even though you said yes because you knew that you'd be splitting the check? Or if you say yes to covering her tab, are you saying no to something else for yourself? Looking at what's my motivation? Is this fear or is this self honor? Am I anxious or am I self honoring? In physical boundaries, this could reference my physical space. It can also reference boundaries regarding my body. So I don't want to be touched like that. Please don't do that. If somebody comes up to you in a space and they want to hug you and you don't want to hug, you are allowed to say, oh, no, thank you. I don't care for a hug right now. One thing that I always encourage moms with little kids and my grandkids, my kids especially, don't ever make your kids hug me. Don't ever make them hug me. I want them to hug out of choice. I don't ever want them to grow up thinking I have to do something because that's an adult. I want them to know that their no is plenty okay and that they can hug me when they feel like it. Because in this world, them knowing that they have an autonomy no is so important. So important. Material boundaries is in reference to our things. Examples would be our clothes, our belongings, our house. Have I let somebody house sit or stay in my house and the way they treat it is less than I would like? How do I feel about saying something? Have you ever loaned your car out and the people don't put gas in the tank or they leave their fast food garbage in there? Is that a boundary? The next time they ask to borrow it, do you say, yes, would you please put the gas in and make sure to take your wrappers out of the car? And how do you feel about that? Yikes. So anytime I feel resentment or annoyed, that's my opportunity perhaps to say something or deal with something internally, because remember, I'm looking for joy and peace. And then time boundaries. So this is in reference to the amount of time that I have to spend. If I have a certain amount of time, as we all do, I don't know anybody that can make time. So if I've decided my day's pretty full and then all of a sudden somebody calls and says, hey, could you do this for me? Do I immediately go, oh, I better say yes? That means, okay, I won't be able to do that. Or do I just say yes without considering my day and my needs and what I have going on for me? Or can I say confidently, oh, thanks for asking. I wish I could do that. I would like to. However, today I'm booked. Does tomorrow at 10 still work? And they might go, oh, no, it doesn't. Thanks, though. And they'll be fine. If your relationship is a solid relationship and if you're dealing with a reasonable person, they're going to say, oh, yeah, no problem. I'll ask somebody else. So what you want to do as you're thinking about different scenarios is you want to ask yourself, where am I saying yes when I want to say no? And where am I reactive versus responding? And where could I make a request instead of accommodating and complying? And am I comfortable with clear, kind, and assertive communication? Or do I feel like I'm being bossy and controlling when I ask for what I need? I heard it described once that we as people, when we don't have any boundaries, are like an abandoned building that's just been lived in by every vagrant. There's no more windows or doors. When you walk through it, there's garbage everywhere. And people just haven't taken care of it at all because there's no boundaries. There's no windows. There's no doors. And if you were to see yourself as a building based on the kind of boundaries you have for yourself right now, what would your building look like? What would your house look like? What is the state of you and your boundaries? What do you allow in? What are you willing to take? Do you feel like you collect people's garbage? And what do you want it to look like? What kind of beautiful home would you want yourself to look like if you had a picture of what that was? I've had somebody describe their space looking like a beautiful craftsman home with a big porch and lots of beautiful furniture on it so people could come visit, and having a wrought iron fence around it so you could see in everywhere. You could see everywhere, but you couldn't just climb in and do whatever you wanted. There was a beautiful, big, huge gate where people could come in, and a lovely walkway all the way to the front porch. And the stairs were big and open, and you could walk up the stairs. And there was beautiful places to sit and visit. And then the front door was the door into this person's heart. And the lights were on, and every room was furnished in such a way that was inviting and would allow people to come in. It was a beautiful picture of what life with boundaries might be like. And then there's times where the front door gets closed and the lights are out, and it's an appropriate time. So take a look at your boundaries. Take a look at the places where you see that you would like to have some change. And this, like I said, is a marathon. It's a discovery. It's very courageous work. And having somebody to work with you in it is so helpful, whether that's a therapist or a coach. It's a powerful solution. And the Living Connected Method modules that we've talked about are so helpful. And one of the reasons that we've already done needs and triggers and how attachment styles develop is because if I can remove the core wounds and the energy that comes with that, the emotion, the feeling like I'm going to be betrayed, and the fear and the anxiety, if I've replaced that with I am respected, I am loved, if I can do that so that there's that belief system within me, then I can create boundaries from that place of self honor and other honoring. And the tools are just there, and I can take the tools with me on into life so I just can continue to build a flourishing, secure, and resilient life that's really satisfying. And when people do this work, all of their relationships benefit. So it's really wonderful. I just invite you to schedule a complimentary call. You can scan that QR code or just go to the website and schedule yourself a call. Either way, having boundaries just upgrades every relationship that you have in your life, and especially to yourself and your self-worth and your self-honor. The quality of life is worthy of, like, for us to live in joy and peace. What would that feel like? Where anxiety was something that was historical for you. It wasn't something that was every day. And where your motivation was love and you lived in joy and peace. So thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you for being here. And I'll look for your emails, and I'm able to send you your slides. And until next time we'll be working on just doing a workshop around what are some growth opportunities? What can we do to press into growing secure, and where does that start? So we'll be doing that next Monday. Thanks.